We are here at the Cathkin Braes, which overlook the city of Glasgow. And I've come here to tell the story of Mrs Helen Dorrans, who came from that city and whose cure from the very brink of death was attributed to the intercession of St Therese of Lisieux. The year is 1909, and Helen Dorrans was in great pain from a cancerous tumour which had grown in her body for at least 8 years. For 2 years she was bedridden, unable to sleep for sustained periods of time. In July 1909, the family doctor told Mrs Dorrans' family that there was nothing now to be done save pain control, and that Helen would gradually become weaker and weaker before eventually slipping into unconsciousness. It was time for Helen and her family to face the inevitable. But Helen Dorrans was a woman of tremendous faith. Novena after novena had been made by friends and relatives for her recovery. On the 22nd of August 1909, when she had not taken solid food for 10 weeks and was on the point of dying, a nun and friend of Helen suggested that since they had tried nearly all the known saints in the court of heaven, perhaps it was time to try someone who hadn't been as yet canonised, but who was gaining a reputation for being a powerful intercessor. This nun spoke to Helen about this little French Carmelite nun and recounted something of her life. Helen considered that she had nothing to lose, so began a novena to Therese of Lisieux. They didn't quite give up on the other saints, but the cause was entrusted to this little flower of Carmel. A few days into the novena, something miraculous happened. At about 11 o'clock in the evening, having taken a small piece of ice, Helen Dorrans had a severe vomiting attack, after which she fell quite exhausted and went into a great sleep. This would be about 11:30. For the last days previously, her sight had become much impaired. She could only see very indistinctly, barely distinguishing figures. But that night, she enjoyed her first natural sleep for many years, until about 5:30 next morning, Friday the 27th of August, when she was aroused by a gentle pressure on each shoulder, as if someone was leaning over her. She became acutely aware of an unseen presence around her bed. On opening her eyes, she saw distinctly everything in the room. All distress and pain were gone, and she felt perfectly well, being able to move her arms and limbs freely. When the family doctor visited her home that day, he was astonished at what he saw. He had no explanation for the change that had taken place since his last visit. Everything was normal. No trace of anything here save a tiny lump about the size of a marble. He had never experienced anything like this before, and though a non-Catholic, he declared that there was no humanly possible explanation for what had occurred. If this new lease of life for Mrs Dorrans was to be permanent, then this was nothing short of a miracle. He said that she had been beyond any medical skill to help, and that a higher hand must have produced the cure, which could not have been brought about by any human means. Dr. Carmichael subsequently provided a medical certificate attesting to this profound and permanent change in his patient's health. This was then forwarded to Lisieux.